I mean, in terms of what got my interest in TV news, I wish I had a more noble answer than this, but it looked easy and I thought you could make a lot of money doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Career Corner, where we answer your career cues. My name is Lukas Kauffman, and joining me today, I've got two very special guests that I know personally. Folks, I've met these people before. We have a rapport, as you would call it. I'm joined today in the Career Corner by Pete Johanns and Meg Handley to talk about working in broadcast news. Pete and Meg, welcome to the Career Corner.
Lucas, thank you very much. And it is so wonderful to see you again. And see, this is the type of rapport we
This is what we
have.
have.
So,
Yeah,
but thank you
absolutely.
very much for having me.
It's weird to see you outside of boxing gloves on Roommate Rumble, Lucas. I can't lie.
Yeah, well, I'll have to be hopping back into those gloves in the fall, but for now, joining you from sunny Los Angeles, and folks, we've got an exciting episode today. So you guys both have some experience in broadcast news. Before we jump, dive into that boots first, introduce yourselves. Tell us about yourselves and what you're doing in your life right now.
Hi, my name is Meg Handley. I graduated from Ithaca in May with a degree in writing and also a degree from the Park School. I was a TVDM major. I currently serve as the weekend evening producer in Lancaster at the top station in Lancaster, WGAL News 8. So I produce 6, 10, and 11 on Saturdays and Sundays, and during the week I assistant produce everything else as needed. While I was at Ithaca, I was super involved in ICTV. I was on exec staff as the director of development for a year. I was heavily involved in Roommate Rumble and helped make sure that show came to fruition, which is why I mentioned that with Lucas. And that's how I know Lucas, because he was the host of the show. I also was involved in theater on campus, and I worked for admissions.
Amazing.
And I'm Pete Johanns. I'm a professor of television and digital media production here in the Park School. And I'm a Duke fan, and Duke is playing today, so that's why I'm wearing this. I teach primarily multi-camera studio production here in the Park School, including introductory, intermediate, and advanced level classes. And I also teach an on-camera performance class. Before I came to be a professor at Ithaca, I worked for a number of years in television in numerous roles, including as a news producer, as well as a news anchor and reporter. And over the years, in my position at Ithaca, I have guided dozens upon dozens of students into starting their broadcast journalism career.
Incredible. And Pete, while we're still on you and you're talking about teaching, you have this experience in the newsroom. What unique challenges come with teaching this field compared to your time working in it?
I think the big thing in terms of teaching, and I don't say this in a mean way, but teaching is a perpetual amateur environment. In that there is this continuous cycle of showing amateurs how to do this. And again, I'm not saying amateurs in any derogatory way. I'm just saying it from a factual standpoint. I think so. In order to kind of have students understand the kind of basics behind the process of making television or producing broadcast journalism, as opposed to kind of when you work in it professionally, you have a group of people who that's their job, and they kind of there's still certainly learning and teaching that goes on within a professional world, but again, it is you're dealing with professionals. Not to say that there aren't its own little challenges in dealing with a professional environment. Certainly, teaching in a college environment. There's quote unquote not much at stake. This is still kind of make-believe television that we're doing. But when you're in the professional world, certainly there's money and jobs on the line when you're doing your job. So I guess those are kind of the big differences between each of the worlds. But I enjoy. There are times when I do miss kind of quote unquote professional television. Those moments are fleeting because I really do relish the opportunity to be able to teach and show students the process that it is to make television and create broadcast journalism.
Incredible. And now this is a question for both you, Pete, and you, Meg. How did you guys, what draw you guys to broadcast news?
Meg,
I
go ahead.
I did not think I was going to go into news at all. News was not the plan. Besides the election coverage that I did during Ithaca, which is my favorite thing in the entire world because it is just as much control as you can over chaos. It is so much fun. I was the field producer for that every single year. It was so much fun. I was pretty dead set on going into entertainment. And then senior year, as I started I went to report ICTV reports, I went to Newswatch, and I met with recruiters and visited different news stations. I started to realize there is sort of an entertainment aspect to news that I really was not expecting. I love the television studio. I took every studio class with Pete. I love the studio and I didn't want to lose it. And so as I started looking for jobs, I realized there is so much of news is keeping people watching. I mean, obviously there's factual and journalism and integrity and making sure you're getting all of that correct, but who cares if it's right, if it's not interesting, if the flow isn't good, if you don't want to keep watching. So I realized I could keep doing that through news. And the other biggest thing is that I wanted to go into a field where I would continually be learning. And that's why I went into media in the first place, because technology is always advancing, things are always changing, and there's never a day where I come out that I didn't do something different or learn something new, even if that's like, oh, I don't really know much about this story, I need to go research the background for it, or I've never used that graphic before and it was perfect here, and that kind of thing. And so those were the two biggest appeals.
In terms of what got my interest in TV news, I wish I had a more noble answer than this, but it looked easy and I thought you could make a lot of money doing it. And so when I was an undergrad and even in graduate school, my career aspirations were to be a news anchor and reporter. And certainly I was able to do that following my completion of my graduate degree. But yeah, I wish it was like I'm being a bit sarcastic with that notion of like it looked easy and I thought I could make a lot of money, but that I'm also not going to be dismissive of that. I did certainly like the notion of being able to kind of engage an audience and be able to tell stories about the local community to an audience, and so that was very intriguing for me too. But it was more of this kind of notion of like, yeah, I can do that. I can part my hair and put on a voice and do that. And I really had a misconception of how not necessarily difficult, although it can be very difficult at times, but how much work really goes into kind of broadcast journalism. And certainly, while I learned about that in my education, it wasn't until I really started working within the field until I discovered, the process that it goes into it. So.
Yeah, and coming back to that process, Meg, you mentioned being in there is like having as much control as you can over chaos. News is most often, I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, and if I am wrong, Pete, it's your fault because you were my teacher in this, but news is, I feel, very often broadcast live. So that's another challenge in itself, even if you have
Oh,
pre-recorded
yeah.
stuff.
And I mean, it's another reason I wanted to do it. And it's also probably the hardest thing in the entire world, because if something that is in your show is wrong, you're live. You have to fix it, or you have to correct it. Or if something breaks, you have to fix it. I I think most producers that I've met, including myself, are very perfectionists over our work. And live does not care about that. Being live does not care how perfect you made your show, how you plan your shots, how great it's going to look when your anchors are standing next to this huge monitor and there's this zoom and there's this graphic and it's going to look so amazing. Does not care. I know just in the past month or two, I have been doing the 2 days a week for the 5 o'clock show, like evening show, 2 days a week for about 2 months now. And I had this amazing top of my show set up. It was so good. I was so happy with it. I had these really cool boxes, and then news broke and we had to hit it in every single block and I had to change the whole entire thing. So that's just how it goes. Or other times there's a mistake in the show and you have to correct it on air. And yeah, live just adds to the chaos. It's crazy.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what do
the
you
notion of
do in that fast-paced environment where anything can change in a moment? How do you maintain accuracy, and how do you make it as reliable as you can in such a chaotic space?
Well, I think first, it really depends on how good your team is, how great you are with that. Like on the weekends, I have a team that I absolutely love and adore, and I'm so glad to work with them. I have a really good relationship with basically everyone on the floor. My anchor and I are really good friends. My director and I are really good friends. So they are always looking out for you because you have to try to be as perfect as you can, obviously, because if you make a mistake, thousands of people are going to see it. But also, if you have a good relationship with your director and your anchor, they're always double checking your work. So they'll read something, and if they don't understand it, they'll ask a question, or if they see a typo or something, they'll fix it. Um, but also it's honestly, it comes down to there's this little function on ENPS that turns the scripts green, and I make sure I check everything 3 times before I turn them green, and they're finished. But a lot of it is kind of having to set your pride aside and relying on your team as well to make sure that everyone is saying, hey, this is good, hey, this is right. Because you can't know every single thing about your newscast when you have a really quick deadline. You can get to like probably 95%, but you do need that assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And
there's certainly a bit of a, dealing with a newscast and certainly live newscasts as well. The majority of newscasts out there are still produced in a live fashion, but there is a certain amount of adrenaline that goes along with that, and throughout the day you're constantly building up into this kind of climax point, if you will, and then one of the great things that at least that I liked about news is that every day was a clean slate. That you build up to the newscast and you execute the newscast, and certainly as Meg is talking about, sometimes modifications have to be made within that newscast, and sometimes they've got to be made very quickly, and plans have to be changed. And certainly, the reliance on the notion of team, and that's a huge aspect of what I teach in my television classes. This notion of teamwork and everyone pulling together. But then you build up to that, and you have this kind of thing, and then the next day you start all over again. And while there are consistent pieces of that, there are variations to that. The puzzle is different every single day. But every day you have to put together that puzzle and get that puzzle on the air at whatever time, and be able to make sure that puzzle or the I like to always draw the analogy of the plane lands on time. And Meg probably knows this very well now after working in news, but always go in light, and always be prepared to give weather more time or less time, depending on the timing of the show and what modifications you have. But again, there is this kind of adrenaline factor that goes into news. And again, that notion of a clean slate is a nice factor. It can be tiresome, again, pushing the rock up the hill every day, only to have it roll back down on you and start again the next day, and you got to push it back up. It is very exhausting, and there is a certain type of endurance that you have to be able to build up to be able to handle that type of work environment.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, pushing the rock up the hill is something I've definitely been feeling in recent days, but keep on pushing. Both of you at this point have mentioned little kind of tidbits of what it's like to be in that newsroom, the different aspects that go into it. I was hoping for both of you to kind of walk us through kind of a typical workday and what it's like to produce a segment. Pete, if you want to, remember way back to, I know you were a much younger man,
Way
but
back then when we would have to hope the electricity worked. No, I mean, listen, it's still the same. Certainly a lot has changed, and there's much more kind of outlets for content distribution that broadcast journalists are responsible for than when I worked directly in news. But again, a lot of the day is you're you're building a house almost, and you start with the frame, and then you fill in, all of the various aspects of the frame. And again, at each day, the house is a little bit different. where you've got, again, the basic frame of the house, but each day you're building, maybe the bathroom's over here, maybe the living room is this size, maybe, and being able to kind of then design the frame of the house, build it and complete it, and then start again. But yeah, I'll let Meg talk a little bit more about kind of the day-to-day kind of when you come in as a producer and start with that blank slate, and then how many hours later, usually it's between 7 and 8, where you have to go on the air.
The frame is a great way to put it. You walk in, and ENPS is obviously the system that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It gives you a template for your newscast that usually you have built, that has everything laid out the way that you like it. So, and that's obviously going to change, but my teases, those are there, and then I fill them in. My weather is there, and I fill in the leads. I have stocks every single day. I have traffic every single day, and we build around those things. So typically the day, I'll go for a weekday because that's a more typical schedule. We walk in and we have a big editorial meeting in the morning. So the morning team will talk about the big stories from the morning. The person on the assignment desk, which that's the person who's saying this photog goes with this person, they take this truck, that kind of stuff. We have this many photogs today. They update on things that are happening throughout the day in our planner. We keep a constant schedule log of things that are coming up and happening. In addition, we have on that planner things that we need to check on. So let's say there was a crash yesterday and we don't know the cause yet. We put tomorrow, do we know the cause now? That kind of things. And the assignment desk will fill us in on all of those things so we can do them throughout the day. Then reporters will give their pitches for what we want them to do. Sometimes they don't. If there's crazy breaking news, they just go to that, and pitches are out of the water. Sometimes there are some shoots set up and we talk about those and we go over those. And then producers can also chime in if there's anything we think we should cover that wasn't mentioned. And then we get into it. And throughout the rest of the day, it's basically just building stuff in and stacking, if you're familiar with that word, basically putting in stories in the order that you like them and where you like them and stuff like that. And granted, that will always change. In my newsroom, we've just instituted, which I really like. So that editorial meeting is like 9:15 to 9:30 every day. Between like 1:30 and 2, our executive producer will come in and we'll just give him like the bones of what we're thinking for our show. And then we can sort of restructure from there. And that has been super helpful. So that's about the halfway point throughout the day is when I have an idea, like the biggest idea of what my newscast is going to look like around 1:30. So even if I'm still like, say like 2 to 4 minutes light, the biggest pieces are all there that I'm sort of teasing to and pushing to, and stuff like that. And then between that, it's just filling it all in, perfecting it, putting in which anchor is reading what, putting in the camera shots, making the graphics. But in the morning up to that afternoon point, it's mostly just writing and deciding what stories need to be in and looking into that story if there needs to be more elements to it. What elements do we have for that story? I mean, if it's a local story and it's a crash, we might not have anything because maybe a photographer didn't go there to film anything. So then you have to figure out how do you make it visually interesting, which in our system, we can request maps and our graphic place will make maps. So if there was a fire, maybe you request to make a map, maybe you get pictures from somebody on Facebook, which obviously you have to get permission for. And then from like 3 to 5-ish, it's just making sure everything is on plan, answering all questions that your anchors have, working with your director if they have any changes, because sometimes your director will be like, hey, this camera move isn't possible, whether it just you forgot and your wires are crossing your head quite literally, or maybe there's one camera person instead of two and they don't have the ability to move the cameras that fast. And you make those adjustments and then you go on the air and you booth it, which you go and you line produce and you keep time and you change things as needed. And that's pretty much it. Boothing is the best part and also the most stressful part.
That's
So
where you're
how
kind
much
of
of
like
your
almost
Oh yeah,
like an
please go
air
ahead.
traffic control person, in that, and to where, as the producer, you're and I always talk about this with my classes in very kind of categorical ways. The producer comes up with the kind of the content, and the director is the person who executes that content. And the producer and director have to work together. Again, this notion of team, the anchors, the producer, the director, the technical personnel, even the photogs, they're all part of this team. That needs to be able to work together to execute something that the audience, again, doesn't know how much work goes into it, nor should they care. But again, being able to go in and guide, as the producer, you're again guiding that newscast while the director's executing it and executing the plan. As a producer, you're still guiding it. And again, making sure that, not to draw on this airport analogy so much, but making sure that the plane lands on time and making sure that all of the content that is supposed to go in the show goes in the show. And if there's a modification of what content, it's usually up to the producer to make that decision in consultation with the director. Again, nothing happens in a vacuum within television, and the ability to communicate effectively within your team is very important as a producer. Is what Meg calls as refers to rather as boothing the show. And that is basically you start the show and you make sure that the show is going accordingly to the timing plan that you've established as a producer.
Also, the best part about having a good team is, yes, you are that air traffic control, but if you rely on everyone and have a good rapport with everyone and a good relationship, I will 90% of the time ask someone else before I make a call. Even if it's me saying, hey, I think I'm going to kill this story, it doesn't really feel relevant, I will yell it out to Giuliani, like, hey, can I kill this? Will that mess you up? Just to make sure, because that's my director. Her name's Giuliani. She's love my life. She's awesome. Make sure that's not going to mess up her queuing system or the way the cameras are going to move. Or if I'm going to make a bigger decision, like, hey, I think we need to flip these two stories. Maybe I'll yell out to my anchor during the break, hey, I think I'm going to flip these two. Is that okay? Just make sure everybody's on the same page. Granted, you have the final call. If you do that with everyone else, then the plane will land smoother and with less turbulence.
I think these plane analogies great, Lukas.
I love the plane analogy. Pete, you mentioned briefly in your when you were answering that last question that people don't really know how much work goes into a news show. What are some other common misconceptions people have about working in news, and what would you want them to understand better about the whole production process?
I think one of the huge misconceptions that people have, the quote unquote normal public, about people that work in the news is that they make a lot of money. And that is certainly not the case, and at the local level. Now, while there are kind of those high-end salaries at a national or network level, or certainly in big markets, but one is, again, the amount of money that news producers, news anchors, news reporters make, especially within the last 5 years. And the salaries have come down tremendously within broadcast journalism. But I think also the other misconception is that people seem to now, while there are these kind of, and it's true in every station that there are these morning meetings or editorial meetings that take place. But I think sometimes the public has this perception of like the news is like trying to control an agenda or trying to kind of pull puppet strings. And really what in all newsrooms that I've worked in, and I've worked in several, it is really that the vast majority of the people who work in newsrooms genuinely care about the community and want to be objective and fair and aren't going in with an agenda or trying to spin the story in some way. And unfortunately, in the past few years, when I worked in news, there was a bit of not necessarily reverence, but I would say much more respect for the notion of being a TV reporter or TV anchor. And that has eroded a lot, especially within the last few years, that there isn't this type of respect for the job that is done. And again, the amount of work that needs to be done in order to put a newscast, not only a newscast on the air, but also all the kind of supplemental content that needs to go on the web, onto social media, on all of the responsibilities that news people have to be able to deliver content to an audience across the various platforms. So I would say those are some misconceptions that that I feel that the kind of general public has about broadcast journalism, especially on the local level.
I think the agenda thing is huge. We get so many emails, no matter what we do, that are like, "You liberal snowflakes sad," or, "Oh, this is just the red perspective. How dare you?" But really, I found at the local level, we do everything we can to make sure our quote unquote agenda is unbiased. We are CNN, I work with content from CNN, NBC, and Associated Press, which NBC meaning I can take content from any NBC affiliate across the country. I can call them and ask for that content or have the assignment desk editor do so. But if I have, so say in the morning we get, the big story of the day is the Alabama IVF thing that was going on. They will post in the morning at like 10 o'clock, "Hey, we're planning to do a story on Alabama IVF. It'll come down at 3." I could plan for it at 3, and then if it comes down and we watch it, and if we feel like it has some sort of bias, we will cut it. We will break it up, we will cut it, we will cover it in some other way. Personally, in my newsroom, we try to keep it very both sides. If we have, like, politically, if we have a legislator or someone coming in to talk, we will make sure somehow the other side is represented in that show. Whether if we have the interview with them afterwards, we'll say, "And here's what Democrats are saying about this issue," or "Here's what Republicans are saying about that issue," or "Here's how that issue is being like reacted to nationally." We try to make sure all of it is really in the middle so that people can make their own decisions. And I feel like locally that seems to be what's happening everywhere. Really, that sort of quote unquote agenda that you'll find. The national news occasionally will lean to a certain side, but that's the same reason why we vet those packages that come from the national news, because sometimes they lean to a certain demographic. But locally, I've found that we really try to be in the middle. I also have found a common misconception, which I'm sure is not in the Park School, but if I tell someone I work in news, they're like, "Oh, what time will I see you on the air?" It's like, what? Do you think the only people that work in news are seen on the air? Which is just so not true. Like, there is so many people that you don't see, or
Yeah,
maybe
most of the work is done by people you can't see.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And maybe you see their name for 5 seconds at the end of the credits and that's all you get. And part of me is grateful for that. Even like my anchor, she texted me the other day and she was like, "Oh, I'm at the grocery store and there's a TV at the front and the news is on and I got recognized by an older couple and they were so sweet, but I'm in my sweatpants and I look awful and I just wanted to come in and pick up my prescription at the grocery store." So it's nice to not always have that, but that's also a funny thing, is how the local people on air sort of become these mini celebrities, because it's true that they're like local area celebs. I mean, our 6 o'clock anchors get recognized pretty much everywhere they go, which is nuts. Anyway, I think that the biggest misconception I've found is, one, sort of on the agenda realm, how stories are chosen and how much vetting we go into that and who makes those decisions and how many people makes those decisions. And two, just how many people are involved that you don't see that are choosing those things. Which, if you're on air, is tough, because I know if I make a mistake, a lot of times who's going to get that email about that mistake? It's my anchor, and the blame goes on to her. And I will feel awful for that, because it's not her fault. She didn't write it. I wrote it. And granted, she had her eyes on it, but the blame is going to her. That person is always taking the flak because that's who the people see. So if who's saying it to you, they're going to take the blame, you know? But really it takes a village, or maybe it takes an entire airport staff.
Takes an airport staff to make a news broadcast happen. And now our listeners know about these misconceptions, and they can spread the word about what the truth really is. Now, Pete and Meg, we are in the home stretch of this episode of the Career Corner. I've got one more kind of technical question, and then we'll get a little more, I don't know, artsy with it, if you want to call it that, some more abstract questions. But Meg, you mentioned earlier that part of the reason that you ended up wanting to go into news was because it's a place where you can learn, and technology changing is a big part of that. So I was hoping that we could briefly touch on the role that technology plays in modern broadcast newsrooms, and how, Pete, you can be able to talk to us about how it's changed the way that things are being produced and delivered.
So we can't even begin to scrape the bucket at Ithaca College of everything that ENPS is capable of, because we have so many different shows that it's not really possible, even if we wanted to, because at least for us, all of it is built off of, one set of a graphics package or whatever. But what ENPS is capable of was the biggest shock I've had in my life when I started my job. It is everything. I mean, I write something and it can go to the director, it goes to the camera, it goes to the anchor, it goes to my reporters. It goes national. All of my graphics are built in there and I can build out of them. And if they're not correct, I send a request and that goes to a team down in Florida who puts them up. They're called the graphics hub. If I have something that I don't want, I have to find the picture. I have to make sure it's not copyrighted and put it in. There is just so much technically that it can do. I also have found that what the director has to do is nuts. If you're interested in being a broadcast director, you should know every studio position as much as you can, because you need to be a leader and you need to understand what each person has to do. Occasionally a director, if during the week, will jump in on camera if somebody's out. There also, that was a huge culture shock, because I for a long time thought I wanted to be a director, but I realized that a producer kind of had those elements that I wanted in the real world, I guess. It's not ICTV. But I was shocked when I got to my station and I realized the director was calling the shots and directing, switching, technical directing, and doing the equivalent of Chiron. They are doing all of it. They are 3 people in one. And I'm like looking at everything she's doing. She's going through our graphics and all these things. And I'm like, oh my God, this is nuts. How do you do it all? And she's like, you just get used to it. I'm like, that's crazy. Technology is insane. I think I answered the main question of that. There might have been something else I wanted to add, but I forget. It will only become more insane as things get automated. And that's sort of what we're looking toward in the future. At Hearst, which is my parent company, is possibly getting directors who program the cameras to move. But even then, there's going to be camera people on the floor making sure that the cameras don't mess up, because they'll be robots. But so that tech is always changing and is always going to keep changing.
Yeah, and Pete, you've been around since probably the first ever news broadcast. So if you want to speak
Edward
on
Morrow and I, we were like that. So no, I mean, certainly yes. I mean, when everything converted to digital, that changed things tremendously, and certainly the ability to again, back when I was working in we shot on actual videotape, and we had to actually edit that videotape. And certainly when all content moved to a digital platform, it made a lot of that stuff a lot easier and faster to be able to do. And while that's good in a lot of ways, it put a lot of pressure on reporters and producers to generate even more content and shorter content, and being able to kind of, again, the audience's expectations of, like, the average story, average VO is 20 seconds, a package is 1:15, that we as an audience want our information, we want it presented to us in an engaging type of way. And so the involvement of graphics and animations, and again, news is information, but news is very much entertainment. And to be able to engage an audience in doing so, I think certainly the transition to high definition television helped things tremendously, and sets look a lot better to an audience. But like I said, and Meg is correct. Technology is not ever going to stop. And I talk about this in my classes when I say, look, they don't even stop toothbrush technology, let alone television. Every time you buy a toothbrush, it's new and improved somehow. But the same is with television, is that we are going to continue to be able to do more stuff faster and get it to the audience quicker. And the audience is going to have those expectations for the appetite of content. And again, Meg is very correct in that when, I used to direct TV news for a while as well. And back then, again, I was calling it, I was switching it, I was doing graphics, I had to time the show. We didn't have a producer in the booth where I was. And so it's this kind of notion of understanding, that at school, everybody has their own little job that they're doing. But in the real world, especially on the local level, a lot of times a singular person is doing multiple jobs. But it's still, a very can be fun environment to work in. As I said, it's very adrenaline based in that you're building up to something each day or each day part, and then again being able to start again fresh the next day. And while things have changed, things are still the same. It's that ability to be able to present content to your audience in an engaging way so that you do have the audience. And again, unfortunately, salaries have really plummeted in broadcast journalism. And unfortunately, we have graduates going into the broadcast journalism industry that they could make more money selling phones at the mall or at a store than they can being a TV reporter or producer. Although I will say that producers are a hot commodity in the world of broadcast journalism. And I have a feeling that in the next few months, Mag is going to be emailing me talking about a major market job offer that she has been given because again, the progression for producers is much faster than necessarily for on-air people. So that has changed tremendously.
That's funny you say that, Pete, because I got a message like literally yesterday from someone
Sure.
someone in Washington, and I was
Wow. Yep.
like, "Oh, are you interested in morning producer?" But producers have contracts, and I'm not looking to break mine, so that's how it is. But yeah, I also on the salary part, I would encourage anyone graduating to really look into your parent company before you take that job, because it makes a big difference. Their values,
Don't
their
work for Nexstar. Excuse me, Nexstar. Don't
oh
work for
my
Nexstar.
gosh. Did you say did I hear someone cough very accurately?
Almost sounded like you said a word there. Just a cough,
Yeah.
though.
But unfortunately, again, that's the way that because there just isn't the local advertising revenue that there once was. And the local ad revenue is not just simply going to the TV station, but it's being split along all sorts of content outlet distributions. And so there isn't the money to pay people. This is not a field that you can go into because you are looking to want to get rich. This is a field that you go into because you have a passion for doing this. There is, and I have a lot of students who work in the broadcast journalism field that make good livings. But I will say that I have a lot of students who have entered the broadcast journalism field, and it has burned them out within their first 5 to 7 years after graduating. It is not an easy kind of lifestyle. Meg works every weekend. My first 5 Thanksgivings after I graduated from college, I was at the TV station. I wasn't home with my family. This is a career of passion, and it can't be a career of, gee, I want to go make money. If you want to do that, sell cars. Because you'll make a lot more money than you will be. And like I said, going back to that misconception of, oh, you're on TV, you must make a lot of money. And it's like, especially for entry-level reporters, it is hard. It is a hard living, and as well as for producers. But really, honestly, and not producers have it quote unquote easier. There just are a lot more opportunities and a lot more opportunities in larger markets for producers. So.
Yeah.
you also
And
have to
unfortunately, the reality is, the contracts, and Meg talked about that. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand. People in news have to sign these agreements, these employment contracts that are typically between 2 and 3 years. So that you can't kind of, even if someone, comes around and says, here's a better job, well, I'm under a contract for another year and a half with this company. And one thing you don't want to do is establish a reputation of breaking a contract. because that is going to put you on a list of not good people to work with. And so yeah, you are signing a contract for less money than you could make being an assistant manager at Arby's. But that's the way it is.
I mean, you could say, let me break this contract if you want to give them your entire savings account, but that's
Yeah,
not
and
really
sometimes they have buyout clauses within contracts, and there is opportunities for that. But again, it is, this is not a quote unquote easy field. It is a very demanding field. It is, again, I talked about this notion of having that endurance to do this on a daily basis, builds up. And I'm sure in the first few months of Meg's job, it was getting used to that pace every day of like, wow. And then, and now she's been there long enough to where she's acclimated to it. But boy, those first couple months, Meg, how was that?
This, I guess you can bleep me in the comments corner. Hell, it was really bad. It was funny because I was like so excited. I mean, granted, the job was great, the people are great, but I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna work 9 to 5 or whatever, and I'm not gonna have any homework when I get home. That's gonna be so awesome. But I was so mentally exhausted that by the time I got home, I just wanted to sit on the couch and do nothing. I would do my chores and get my groceries and do my job, and that was it until I want to say maybe November. I started to really feel like I was in the swing of things, and I started in the beginning of July. So it was, for a while, it was just giving myself the grace to be like, okay, I need to learn how to separate from it when I get home. That's also the hard part, is that taking it out of your mind when you leave the station is tough.
And speaking of things that can be learned, you guys have already shared lots of great advice, but we are reaching our closing time. So before we do close, I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to, if you have any additional advice you want to give it. And also if you have any memorable experiences or stories or fun little anecdotes about working in news that you want to share, and then we'll close out our episode after that.
I have a very funny story that I can share, but I'll share a bit of advice first, which is that I think every professor has said it 80 million times, but your network is your best friend. You need to meet people, you need to talk to people, you need at those career events. I don't know if they still host it, but the cow is where I met my recruiter, the little career event where there were cows all over campus, not actual cows, like fake cows and blow up cows and cow themed pencils and all that fun stuff. That is massive. That is where I met my recruiter, and where my recruiter said, have you considered Lancaster? And I said, absolutely not. That is farmland and I'm not going there. And turns out I was wrong. And it's a little city and it has a little college town feel, almost like Ithaca does. And I love it there now. And who would have thought? But the people are your best friend. They can get you in the door. I mean, I got into Hearst, and then Hearst has this referral system, and my college best friend Sid was looking for a job, and there was a job in Burlington, and I was able to refer Sid to that. And Sid was really interested, but it got her name off the pile because an employee had referred her. Not to say she wouldn't have got off the pile off of her own merit. I'm sure she would have. She's doing an amazing job in Burlington. So shout out to Sid for being a morning producer in Burlington. But your people are your best friends. So that's the advice that I would give to you. Even maybe somebody that you met once, you never know where they're gonna show up again. I met a reporter once through maybe an alumni call who now reports for Pittsburgh, who I have communicated with. So like, just crazy things, like don't burn your bridges. And my funny story is, I will try to do it quickly, is that we were covering Thon, an event that you may or may not be familiar with, which is a dance marathon for childhood cancer research at Penn State. And we were covering that. And we were so excited because our 11 o'clock show on Saturday, we had this interview with a Penn State alum who had battled cancer and was now returning to campus to dance in Thon. And we were so excited. And he was in our dynamic, which is the top part of the show with the quick little stories where it's pre-cut, pre-edited, pre-tracked. And at 10:50, he canceled on us. And they couldn't find him anywhere from like 10:30 to 10:50. They were looking for him in the arena, couldn't find him. So we had to restructure the entire part of the show. Fortunately, it worked out. Clean show, no issues. They found somebody else to interview, but we did have to restructure the top of the show off the fly, kill our dynamic, and that was really fun. But the funny part of this is that my reporter and my photog were like, man, that was rough. We need to go get a drink. So after that, they went down and they went out to the bar and they were like, we did it. We did it. And they're celebrating. They're like, we got through it. We got through Thon. It went really well. And who do they see stumbling, literally stumbling out of the bar next door is the guy we were supposed to interview.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, man, you guys should have walked up and asked for his picture. Can you imagine if you went to the bar and the reporter you canceled on came up and asked you for a picture? Oh, I would have died. They didn't do that though.
That would be uniquely yeah, that would I'd be a little taken aback.
I mean, he was stumbling, so granted, would he have even known who my reporter Jake was? That's
hard to
another
say. It's hard to say.
hard to say, but yeah, that's my funny story for the night.
In terms of advice that I would have for people, if you are interested in pursuing a career in broadcast journalism, I think the big thing is to get internship experience. I think that is a great kind of way to be able to get a taste and a flavor of what it's like to be able to work in a newsroom and truly understand kind of the environment that it takes to be able to create an effective newscast on a daily basis. And I think, again, going back to my statement of this can't be something that you want to do because you think that you're going to get rich doing this. This has to be something that is a passion of yours and that you have a fire to do. But I will say this, if you do work in TV news and you do it for a while, you can do anything. And I talked to a number of my students who have transitioned out of TV news into quote unquote normal jobs, and they're like, this is easy compared to like what I had to do for TV news because again, just that frenetic and adrenaline laced kind of work environment. In terms of funny stories, I don't know how many I can share on this podcast, but one quick bridge one on. So back then, before the days of cell phones, we used to communicate in TV stations via walkie-talkie, CBs, basically, and we could listen in on each other's station. And so when we would talk over the CDs, we would talk in like code so that the other stations couldn't hear what we were doing. There's this kind of like weird competitiveness among TV stations in cities. And so one time, I was producing the overnight news, so it was like 4 a.m, and a reporter had come in and they had to leave to go to a story in Albany, so they were having to drive far away. So while they were driving, and this reporter had a good sense of humor, he kept calling back on the CB, talking in kind of like this code, like some big story was happening. And I caught on, and we were playing back and forth, and pretending like some big like shooting was going down and everything like this, and SWAT team was there, and and then they got out of signal, so we stopped. And fast forward about 2 weeks later, again, this is back when we had fax machines. A union that was on strike had sent a fax, and my fax machine ate it. And so I called the producer, my colleague at one of the other stations. I'm like, hey, did you happen to get that fax? Because I kind of need that. And he's like, I shouldn't give this to you. He's like, you guys had me calling every police station in the state, wondering what was going on because we were just going back and forth about this fake story. So that's my abridged little funny story with news. I still look back fondly on my days in news. I do miss that adrenaline. I loved working with the people in news. I still know a lot of them at the station that I worked at primarily, and it can be a very rewarding career, absolutely. And as I said, if you can work in TV news, you can handle any type of job.
Incredible. Pete, Meg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Lukas, thank you very much for having such low standards in guests. So.
Nice to see you, man.
And folks at home, you do not have to wait for our next episode to get career guidance. You can visit drop-in hours every weekday from 11 to 2 in Muller Faculty Center 101. I'm Lukas Kauffman, and this has been Career Corner.